Hey everyone, and welcome back to another World of Warcraft video. So, doing story in an MMO is generally pretty tricky, but in recent times, Blizzard have been getting a good bit better, and I am actually quite excited to see the story of Battle for Azeroth, especially since Christy Golden now seems to be involved with the game itself. But sometimes things have not always worked out that great for the characters of World of Warcraft, which brings us to today. Let's talk about the people who pretty much got the shaft. And we've got to start off with Voljin. This couldn't exist without him being in it. There might be some hope for the guy though, but that said, he is very much dead. So, Voljin has been a staple since Warcraft 3, where he allies with Thrall, which is something that would lead to a lot of prosperity for the both of them, and quite a strong friendship. Voljin did not do a massive amount of stuff in the game, but he did start to really play a role in the Mists of Pandaria expansion. Then Garrosh began to sort of mess up the Horde, and Voljin was one of the first ones to pretty much stand up to him. Now, he lived through an assassination attempt, he kick-started the rebellion, and he was there at the end. Thrall, of course, chose him as the new war chief, which is a move that, if I remember correctly, people really liked. Voljin was a sort of a well-liked, honourable character. The in-game Horde was supposed to be a more sort of honourable group of misfits, you know, the type who the Alliance would look down on, but still sort of good people. Voljin seemed to be a return to this, and many Horde players were kind of excited at the prospect of him being the new war chief, definitely because it was one that felt quite different from the Mists of Pandaria Garrosh storyline. Voljin, though, he didn't do much in Warlords of Draenor, so of course people were pretty excited to see what would happen in Legion. And the events of the Broken Shore cut those hopes down. Well, yeah, the notoriously hard-to-kill Voljin just got himself stabbed with a foul blade, and then he was left with a seemingly incurable poison because of that would eventually kill him. At some point, the Loa talk to him, and they tell him that Sylvanas should actually be his successor, which, you know, he just sort of listens to them. It was certainly an odd choice. You got people like Saurfang and Bane going around who generally would fit the bill pretty well. What many people saw here was Blizzard killing off Voljin so that they could install a bit of a fan favourite and maybe a more marketing-friendly character. As we progressed through Legion, these events were not really explained that much, and this left a lot of people kind of disappointed that this character pretty much had been built up for years, and it was just tossed aside. However, Battle for Azeroth does aim to resolve this. We're going to be dealing with the Loa in this expansion, and presumably, based on what they've said, the spirit of Voljin. Okay, we're not going to see him as the leader of the Horde, but we could actually see some resolution to his character, and yeah, hopefully we will get a little bit more than just, oh, he's dead, you know, he's burnt now, and that's pretty much the end of it. Alright, Garrosh Hellscream, this guy's got to be covered. So, he started off a super interesting character. We found him in Outland, he was struggling with the legacy of his father, and he eventually did join us in Azeroth. He found out that Grom died a bit of a hero, which was good for him. Garrosh then led the Horde expedition into Northrend, and Garrosh at this time, he really held the ideals of the old Horde. He wanted glory and honor and conquest and all of that sort of good stuff, but not in the, you know, terrible demon blood way. Really, this was just to relive the stories of the glory days that he heard as a kid. Of course, the Northrend campaign ended quite successfully. They all came back, and eventually the cataclysm happened. Thrall departed the Horde at this time, instead choosing the Earthen Ring and his abilities as a shaman. Garrosh was then left in his stead as war chief. Garrosh had no experience ruling, doing any of this stuff, and Thrall pretty much just left him to it, not really giving him much guidance. Things were kind of rocky for the other races of the Horde at this time, but there was still a core of honour with Garrosh. He was furious over Sylvanas using the Plague and raising new dead. He compared her to the Lich King. Over in the Stone Talon Mountains, one of Garrosh's commanders killed a bunch of neutral druids who really didn't need to be killed. There was no good reason. While quoting Saurfang, he picked up this guy, Cromgar, and tossed him off a cliff to his death. Right, so honour was like totally a thing for Garrosh at this time. Yes, he was impulsive, hot-headed, warmongering. You know, he's very much rooted still in those old ideas of work culture.
Honor, Cromgar. No matter how dire the battle, never forsake it.
Then Mists of Pandaria saw a massive increase in his aggression and a bit of a decrease in the honour. What he attempted with things like the Divine Bell were kind of out of character with the previous war chief who, as an example, was furious at what Sylvanas was doing, generally did not like unnatural stuff. and it even goes against his shame over his father's role with the demon blood. Garrosh then uses the Heart of Yeshuraj to further his power, which again is something that's even further away from the Garrosh that we saw during the Cataclysm, and I don't really think Blizzard managed to bridge that gap with his character. Now, if you fast forward past his defeat in the Siege of Orgrimmar, War Crimes, and the very start of Warlords, we eventually get to the time where he dies. So Thrall challenges him to a Makara. Now, Thrall seemed to use some pretty cheap, dishonourable tactics to win, which is really against what that ritual fight's supposed to be. The rules are that you can't wear body armour, and you can only have one weapon, and that weapon can be blessed by a shaman. Now, the fight starts normally until Thrall decides, you know what, enough's enough. It's time to just bloody kill him. And it turns out that being a big, beefy warrior does not count for much when your opponent can just throw fire at you, get the earth to grab you, and then, simultaneously, crush, burn, and electrocute you to death in a very painful way. While the rules don't seem to specify stuff about magic, this did seem to be a pretty dishonourable dick move that we'll sort of cover later. Now, the Warcraft movie did seem to say that magical things were pretty much banned in this ritual. Blizzard had heavy control over the lore decisions of that movie, so make of that what you will. Now, during the fight, pretty much everything that Garrosh criticises Thrall for is true.
You made me war chief! You left me to pick up your pieces! You failed me! You never had the strength of a true warrior. You made me what I am!
So Garrosh had a bit of a strange change in character that wasn't really told that well in-game, and then he was killed off in a what at the time was a hilariously unself-aware way, and that's why he makes it into this video. And if you want an interesting side thing, check out Garrosh Did Nothing Wrong, it's a pretty good watch. So we mentioned Thrall, but of course, let's just properly talk about Green Jesus. There's a reason why Green Jesus became a bit of a meme within the community. Thrall was always a heroic character who was a savior figure to the orcs, right? He played a pivotal role in securing the future for their people in Azeroth and all of that good stuff, and generally he was one of the most loved characters in the franchise. And then the Cataclysm happened, and it was seemingly decided at this time that Thrall was now the main character of the MMO, not just the Horde campaign of Warcraft 3, so we were essentially his sidekicks. Now, in doing this, Blizzard inadvertently made Thrall a bit annoying, leading people to kind of turning against him, really, or at least being frustrated at his in-game representation. Now, Thrall's great, and I'm a little bit sad that this sort of happened to him. Then, of course, we have his unwillingness to accept his responsibility for the Garrosh problem, which honestly just doesn't seem that well written, but later on he sort of gives up in Legion, and they actually suggest one thing that I really do like. Thrall's new weakness as a shaman, in his view, is because the elements stopped answering him after he killed Garrosh, perhaps because it was a dishonourable action. How the elements of Draenor and Azeroth can actually talk to each other through a time portal, I've got no idea. But part of why I bring Thrall up here is because he's going to feature heavily in Battle for Azeroth. Alex Afrasabi seemed to indicate that Thrall is one of the main Horde characters that we'll be, spending time with, and as much as his writing has been weak in the recent history, I think Thrall is still a great character, and having present in this new expansion is definitely quite exciting, especially if he can bring a sort of old Horde-styled honor to the site. Next, a quick word on Jana. Jana makes it in here because her in-game representation has led to some people being pretty confused over her character, which makes sense. It's all they've actually seen in-game. Now, I really like this character, but part of that's because, well, she's really well written by Christie Golden. 3 books were done which involve her character, and they really make the in-game events work and make sense. Battle for Azeroth, of course, is set to deal with her properly delving into her past, her regrets and all of that stuff, and how she moves forward as a character. I think this could be great. Properly having Jana be a character in-game is a big opportunity, especially with Christie Golden being a Blizzard employee now. So yeah, Jana, a little bit shafted, but it seems like stuff should be turning around there. Next up, Admiral Taylor. Okay, Admiral Taylor was one of the most well-known Alliance characters in the game, and unlike most characters, he was 100% established within World of Warcraft itself. So Admiral Taylor was established during the Cataclysm. Basically, when we were questing in Vashj'ir, he, along with his marines, are saved by the player, and throughout all of the Vashj'ir questing, the player and Taylor are working together, and this makes him a character that we actually spent a decent amount of time with in the game. the character went down really well with people, and then as we moved on to Mists of Pandaria, you know, canonically he was made an admiral, and we see him play a more major role. He's captaining the royal flagship. He is one of the main alliance characters in that expansion. He's got quite a few quests. He's generally there for a good few things, and of course you've got stuff like the Serpent Shrine cutscene. And that's all pretty great, but then Warlords of Draenor happened, and this is where we really run into problems. He's just killed off screen. Gone. Now, okay, the whole mystery surrounding Admiral Taylor's garrison was kind of cool, but it's a bit odd to essentially just waste 2 expansions worth of character development for a quick 20-minute questline that's throwaway. I think this is especially annoying because he was a character that, like, belonged to World of Warcraft itself. All his development was done in-game and seen by players as they quested. He was one of the few recurring characters that did not rely on exterior game materials. So, if he had have stayed around, he could have actually been a decently major character, perhaps being a tier below the likes of Khadgar and, you know, that crew. They really had a great opportunity to build something here, and they just threw it away. Which is odd, and I mean then they couldn't even commit to throwing him away, so they just made him a ghost follower, because why the hell not? Next, Yrel. So here's the thing with Yrel, and by extension the rest of the Warlords of Draenor cast. They pretty much all were gutted, because the middle chapter of their character arcs were pretty much just cut. Yrel seemed to be a very popular character at the start of the expansion, but then by the end in 6.2, her sudden big raise in power had opened her up to a lot of criticism. So let's tackle this one by analogy. Okay, do you know this guy? So, he starts off as a farm boy, he ends up saving the day. If you watched episode 4, and then episode 6, and you didn't do 5, you'd think that Luke was a bad character, his power increase would have been stupid. Well, Warlords of Draenor had this problem. The Shattrath City raid tier, which I assume would have been a whole major patch, was scrapped. What did this mean? Well, it meant the middle chapter of Yrel, Grom, Duratan, Draka, that whole crew, that middle chapter of their arc was gone. It's very clear that Yrel's arc was pretty much meant to be the standard hero's journey. Well, Blizzard did the start of that arc and the end of that arc, they forgot the middle, and the middle's probably the most important part of the hero's journey. Now that's why I think these characters were shafted. That's my personal sort of thought for that. Of course, a lot of other players are also kind of unhappy that they didn't really come back. After all, they did say this at the end of 6.2.
If you ever need us, we will be here.
Until we meet again.
Okay, time for a minor one, Amber. So, she's one of the SI7 agents that Alliance players will have remembered, mainly from Mists of Pandaria, but she existed a long time before that. In Vanilla, she was a quest giver in Westfall, where she was spying on a Defias watchtower. That then got updated for the Cataclysm, and then in Mist, she's a pretty major character during the initial questing, where the Alliance players join an SI7 squad. Later on, she and Sully head over to Dun Morogh to help fend off the Frost Troll invasion, and they also help to establish the Alliance presence during the Darkspear rebellion of patch 5.3. Okay, all this stuff's great. And then, you know, some time passes, and she's unceremoniously killed off screen. We just find her corpse with a dagger in the back. Once again, this does actually lead to one of the really good Class Order Hall campaigns with some great lore in it, but it's an example of Blizzard just sort of killing a character off, doing it off-screen for a bit of cheap quest motivation. I understand that sometimes characters have to die, but sometimes it feels like it's done in a cheap manner where they make a bunch of progress with the character and then just sort of throw it out, really for not that much gain. Next, we're going to call it back to the old horde with Karn Bloodhoof. This guy was great in Warcraft 3, and then in World of Warcraft, he didn't do much, and then he got killed, and he was killed off screen. Now, the circumstances surrounding his killing are quite interesting. Garrosh kills him accidentally in a Makara, but that's because he didn't know that his blade was tampered with by Magatha Grimtotem, so at the time, it just felt a bit odd for a core horde leader to just be killed off in this way. It's kind of sad that we never really got to see this character live up to what you would have thought about him from playing Warcraft 3. I think that really is one of the, I know this is going back a bit, but it is one of the more sad things with an in-game Warcraft character. So there you go, that's pretty much my thoughts on the characters who have been shafted over the most in World of Warcraft, but I do want to end this one on a vaguely positive note. So, Battle for Azeroth seems to be quite character-focused in terms of its story, at least that's what the Blizzard guys have been saying. I think that's very good. Often we've been focusing on the big, you know, space Satan dude who's going to stab the planet and all that, and all those big sort of existential crises, well, if there is a little bit of time of a more ground level story, I think there's a lot of potential for good character work to build up these characters and have the actual emotional story of the game be vaguely interesting instead of just, wow, epic. Because as much as things that are epic, like going and, you know, fighting Big Space Satan, as much as that's cool, it's the characters that count. So I'm glad the Battle for Azeroth seems to have that as a focus. But anyway, this video is pretty much just the characters who I think really got shortchanged in World of Warcraft, and I'd love to hear what ones you think could have been done better, or if you disagree with some of my picks. So that's it for me. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.